Colombia is the most biodiverse country in birds of the world now. That's something like 11,000 species of birds. And so we have something like 1/5 of all the species live in Colombia. No?
Welcome to a special series in partnership with the Nature Conservancy, a look within Latin America and biodiversity. In this series, we speak with 10 leaders from the Nature Conservancy in Latin America about different forms of biodiversity throughout the region. With a special look inside the Nature Conservancy's Latin America Impact Report, which details the organization's work in conservation across 12 distinctive areas in Latin America. Welcome to the second episode in our series on biodiversity. This time, we're joined by Tomas Walschburger, Senior Scientist for the Nature Conservancy in Latin America, for an in-depth discussion on Colombia's extraordinary biodiversity with a special focus on its remarkable bird species. Colombia is one of the 17 mega-diverse countries in the world, boasting about 10% of global biodiversity. It ranks first globally for bird species with nearly 2,000 unique species, accounting for 1/5 of all birds on Earth. This incredible diversity is largely due to Colombia's varied ecosystems, from the Andean mountain ranges to its Amazonian forests, wetlands, and coastal regions. These habitats provide critical resources for migratory birds and endemic species, making Colombia a vital hotspot for conservation efforts. Yet, as Tomas explains, this biodiversity faces threats from deforestation, habitat loss, and climate change, which require innovative strategies to protect its unique natural heritage. So tune in and take flight with us as we explore Colombia, one of the planet's most biodiverse countries. Welcome back to the Green Hour. Today we have a special talk. This is episode number 2 in our biodiversity series in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy in Latin America. And today we're talking with Tomas Walschburger, the senior scientist for the Nature Conservancy in Latin America. Tomas, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to talk about Colombia and to talk about birds with you today.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's also a great pleasure to talk with you and to be invited.
So I think the first place that we'll start here is learning a little bit about you, learning about your background, where you are now, and how you got to the place you are today of working with the Nature Conservancy.
Well, I was born in Colombia. No, I'm Colombian, but of German origin. And I studied biology here in Bogota, Colombia, and made my doctoral studies in Spain, in la Universidad de Santiago de Compostela. And then I worked before I made my doctoral studies in the Colombian Amazon for almost 15 years. So I worked mostly with something with birds, and then also I worked on regeneration processes in Amazonian forests, and worked also with some endangered species like river turtles, the giant river turtle, and we had to create some national parks, the Chiribiquete National Park and the Cahuinarí National Park, and worked a lot of time with indigenous people. And then after I returned from my doctoral studies in Spain, I worked as a professor for a year in one university, Universidad Javeriana, and then I had the opportunity to participate in a selection for the position as science coordinator for TNC. So I joined TNC something like 18 years ago as science coordinator, and I am senior science advisor. A more general job, supporting many activities here at TNC in the Colombian program mostly.
I guess in your current position with the Nature Conservancy, I think you said you've been there for 18 years, but what kind of work are you doing on a day-to-day basis with the organization?
So At this moment,
Yes. Yeah.
mostly, yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm mostly centered now my work in the Orinoco Basin, which is one of the iconic places we have in Colombia, in our Colombia program. So there's something like 16 iconic places, and there's three of these iconic places now, which are special places because of biodiversity, uniqueness, now, so they have unique species, endemisms, threats, and so we have priorities these three landscapes. One of this is the Orinoco Basin. There's the Magdalena Basin, which is maybe the main basin of Colombia, where maybe 80% of people live, and the other one is the Amazon Basin. So Colombia shares the Amazon Basin with Brazil, with Venezuela, Peru, Ecuador, and Brazil. No, so we have not a very extended area in the Amazon, but it's almost 300,000 kilometers. No, yes, it's obviously a huge area. Also, no, it's one third of the country. No, is the Amazon, and one third, much in a certain sense, is also the Orinoco Basin. No, so half of the country, or more than half of the country, is in these two iconic places. No, almost all of Colombia is an iconic place because yes, we are one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. No, being in size relatively small compared to other countries like Brazil, which is number one, and Indonesia, Colombia, maybe the second most diverse countries in the world.
So it's interesting, Tomas. I guess this was last September, maybe last October. I was in New York City during Climate Week, and I was actually listening to a talk by Ivan Duque, who's the former president of Colombia, and he was talking about biodiversity, talking about the Amazon rainforest. And these talks that I listened to during Climate Week, I had never done a lot of research on South America. Not really looked into biodiversity, so my mind was just wide open. I had no idea about how biodiverse this area was. And like you're saying, I think you just said one third of the country is the Amazon, and I think one half of the country you're saying is rainforest. So this is wild to me, and I'm glad that we're kind of unpacking Colombia, because through research I saw that Colombia is one of the world's 17 mega diverse countries, and I think you just mentioned, I have a statistic down. Colombia hosts nearly 10% of the global planet's biodiversity. And as you're saying, Colombia is not that big of a country, but it has 10%. So that's just crazy to me.
Yes, that's absolutely crazy. I think this unique biodiversity is due that obviously of the position of Colombia, in the northern part of South America. It's something like the bridge between Central America and South America. And I think that also when the Andes Cordillera, the mountain range, the Andes mountain range comes into Colombia, it splits into three mountain ranges. So we have something like biodiversity is due also, it's caused mostly because of isolation of species. So because they live in an area and they cannot communicate to another one, so they are, they are isolated. And if they are isolated from several hundreds of thousands of years, so they diversify and create new species. No, so Colombia. So you have, because of all these different climates and all these barriers we have in the landscape. No, so all this heterogeneity helps to create diversity. No, so we have also a lot of climates. Now we have extreme deserts in the northern part of Colombia. We have the wettest rainforests in the world, no, which are on the Pacific coast of Colombia, no, where it can rain more than almost 20 meters a year. So yes, it's incredibly humid, no? So, and also very humid places and very humid rainforests has also a higher diversity. It's not very well explained why. Why? Because if it rains more, there are more species. But also all the climate change that had occurred during the last 2 million years. No, from there was a lot of periods where it was much rainier than today or much drier than today. And so all these climate changes, all these different climates, all these geographic barriers helped to create this incredible biodiversity and uniqueness of Colombia. No? So I think yes, in South America, obviously Brazil has higher biodiversity, but it's also 8 times bigger than Colombia. No? So yes, and so it's very packed all in Colombia.
Right, right. Yeah, Brazil's massive. Brazil's a massive country. I forget. I mean, compared to the U.S., how big Brazil is, how many states it would encompass. But that's interesting. I've never heard, and again, I'm new to this topic of biodiversity. So the way you just broke it down, of you have all these different regions. You have the Andes Mountains, which come in and kind of split Colombia into three parts, or three mountain ranges. And you have all these different areas in Colombia that were isolated. And you're saying through isolation, through this isolation with not being interfered with, is that what you're saying? The biodiversity occurs at that point when there's isolation?
Well, I think yes, isolation, and it can be isolation because of mountain ranges that happened. So the three mountain ranges of the Andes in Colombia, there's one which is the oldest one, which is the Central Cordillera, which is the central one, which is more of volcanic origin. And the other two is not the Eastern and the Western Cordillera, and mostly the Eastern Cordillera is the youngest. No, it's something like 30 million years ago, and has been created mostly because South America is shifting to the west. So it's, in a certain sense, the uprise of all these mountain ranges is the last one is relatively recent. No, 30 million years ago. Obviously, in 30 million years is a lot of time, and so this helped the isolation of all these plant and animal populations, and so to help this diversification and also in freshwater ecosystems. But also, it's interesting because before the Orinoco Basin was the biggest basin in South America. No, the Orinoco Basin was a huge basin, and it drained, and the Amazon didn't exist. So it drained in something like the same place it's draining now into Venezuela. But because of this uplift, it was also created a big lake, an inland lake that isolated also a lot of populations. And so there is also incredibly high fish biodiversity because of all these changes in geology and isolations and changes. And so the Amazon basin and the Orinoco basin together, they share a lot of species, and they are also the most biodiverse watersheds and fishes of the world. No, there are more than 3,000 species among the Orinoco and the Amazon. No, there's no other place in the world with this high fish biodiversity. No? So all these complicated geologic history, I think, helped a lot to create all these high, incredible biodiversity. And obviously, altitude also helps, no? Because if you have species, lowland species, and then it goes up. So we have different types of forests, no? Lowland forests, and then we go into the Andean forest, the upper Andean forest, and then also Paramos, which is a unique ecosystem that only exists in Colombia and Ecuador, the northern part of Ecuador and in Venezuela, but most of all these paramos, which are grasslands, highland grasslands, no, they live upon 3,500 meters, not something like 10,000 feet. So it's very, very highland ecosystems and unique, and they have an incredible endemism. Now, almost all species are endemic because these are isolated mountain ranges, and because of all this isolation, they have unique species. Now, because yes, so every one of these paramos have unique plant species, bird species, insect species. Now, so all these factors if we sum them together, create this uniqueness in biodiversity. No, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for breaking it down like that, because that's very easy to take in and to understand. I guess I would ask you, because when you were just breaking down those different mountain ranges, I think you said the earliest or the latest one was 30 million years ago, and we're talking about isolation and how isolation prompts biodiversity. But I would ask you the question: how does human interference affect biodiversity? Because when humans are involved, or there's mass, I guess, production or agriculture happening in these areas, how does that affect biodiversity in these areas that were once isolated?
Well, I think we can make a very. South America was also isolated until 3 to 5 million years from Central America and North America. They joined. There was created the Panama Bridge, no? So they connected. So Central America and South America got connected, and there was a big faunal interchange, no? And also plants came in. But it was also the cause of a mega extinction, because a lot of species coming from the north, from North America and Central America, they came into South America, and South America had I think they had an even higher biodiversity. No, there was a lot of extinction because there was a lot of predators coming in, and so a lot of species, for example, in the Orinoco grasslands, which is one of the areas which I study most, the extinction of all the big mammals that also happened in North America. No, there were a lot of much more, an incredible diverse fauna of mega mammals. No, so there were a lot of giant sloths living here, giant armadillos. No, so there were a lot of incredible animals. No, you cannot imagine. So all these grasslands here were incredibly diverse, but many of these species got extinct because of the connection, and they mostly coming in a lot of predators and cats coming in from the north. No, so they were much more aggressive. But also something like 25,000 years ago, also men come into South America, no? So we still are not very sure if they came over from North America into South America, over the Bering stretch in the northern part. But there are also theories that they came from the south, no? So we are not very, no, so that they came over water from the Pacific into Peru, and so they colonized the Amazon very, very early. And they say that, as you were asking me of people, no, and the impact of people, so many of the species of this mega fauna, there were still a lot of species surviving also in the Amazon, but mostly in these grasslands. And so we have at this moment, if you go to the Orinoco grasslands, there are almost no herbivores. No, it's an incredible grassland, very extent and very wide, but there are no herbivores. No, because yes, they were all hunted down also by indigenous people which came in. So they used fire, and they used also obviously, I think, spears and air and arrow, no, and to hunt all these animals. So they say that we had two causes of extinction. The first one, the connection with Central and North America, and then that the humans come into South America. And obviously they finally, I think that indigenous people adapted to these new ecosystems. Now, obviously they helped to get extinct some species, but later on they learned all about diversity, about species of the plants, the uses of the plants. So there was a very cultural and strong connection of indigenous people to their land. So yes, they conquered it, but they also learned to know it. No, and in the 20,000 years they have been living here in South America. No. So I think it's the same as in the US. No, you know that indigenous people has a stronger connection, and all the cultural connection and the spiritual connection to their land is very strong. But when Spaniards came in, obviously that was the second invasion we had, no, in South America. Obviously the philosophy were mostly to dominate, no, and that's, I think, in our culture, in our human culture, is not that that we have to dominate nature, no, and we have to extract from nature, and so it's more that the nature we have to use it, and it's not a different relation, no, that we can really say, well, we have to work with nature. No, I think that's changing, no, and now we are saying we have to work with nature. They say no, we have to be nature positive. No, there are a lot of ideas. If we don't recover nature and we don't change our relationship to nature, I think the probability that we get also extinct is very, very high, no, because we already see, no, with climate change that we are losing a lot of biodiversity, a lot of ecosystems are collapsing, extinction rates are higher than ever. Well, I think in that sense, it's not the best moment of the planet, no, and not the best moment for biodiversity also, yeah.
I work in the building and design industry in near Atlanta, Georgia, in the U.S. And what we talk a lot about is regeneration. How can we make buildings that are regenerative, that give more back to nature than they take? How can we, build things that are going to last and they're not going to use up a lot of resources? And I think that goes exactly back to what you're saying of regeneration. Instead of looking to dominate nature, why don't we look at solutions to regenerate and not to just continue to take, and use that model of take more than give back. And I would ask you, Tomas, what impact, I'm going to talk about this on some future podcasts too, but what impact have you seen deforestation having in Colombia, in these areas that are so biodiverse? What is the impact of deforestation?
We always think, for example, that the Amazon is also very homogeneous at species, no? So, but it's not the case, no? For example, the Colombian and the Ecuadorian Amazon is very, very different in species composition, no? Because of the same things, no? It was isolated during a lot of time, and also there was something like a Pleistocene refuge, no? That which were forest area that got totally isolated during ice ages, no? During cold ages, where there was much less water circulating in the planet. So these islands of forest, so they diversified also. So we have very, very different species here in Colombia and Ecuador mostly, compared if of those species we found in Peru, or we found in the lower Amazon basin, or in Bolivia. So there happened also a huge diversification in the Amazon. So if we lose, it's not that we can say, well, if we lose 20% of the Amazon rainforest, they say, well, there's lots of forest still remaining, no? But the problem is that if we deforest, and deforestation is occurring mostly in the Colombian and then also in Ecuador, along the foothills going into the Amazon, no? So yes, that is a threat, because we are losing a lot of unique species that only live at the foothills of the Andean, the transition from the Amazon to the Andean slopes. So and the foothills, I think, are also the wettest regions in the Amazon, no? It's much wetter here, no? There's places in the foothills of the Amazon where we have maybe 4,000 to 6,000 millimeters, 6 meters a year, no, of rainfall. So it's also very humid, and it's what I explained before. No, if the more humid an area is, the higher the biodiversity, and it's also maybe higher diversity because the soils at the foothills is also much richer. No, because as I told you before, there was a lot of wetlands in the Amazon, and it was a big lake and all these. So mostly this lake sediment has a lot of sediments coming in, and so the sedimentation made that this, because it's mostly sands coming from the end, so the soils in the Amazon are incredibly poor. I think it's one of the poorest soils in the world. So it's only good at the foothills, but in the lowlands it's relatively poor, no? So all again, if we lose all these different types of forests, and because species also adapt, not to different types of soils, to different types of soil, to waters, to different types of rainfall, and so all this also helps to maintain all this diversity. But I think the most critical part of losing the Amazon, and maybe most people already know this because they always say that it's something like the lung of the world, not the Amazon, because it's absolutely critical for climate regulation, no? Because all when the water comes in from the Atlantic into the rainforest, no, in Brazil, it falls down, and then the trees they evaporate, no, evapotranspirate again the water, no. So the water goes down, evaporates, and goes further in with the winds, no. So the winds bring in humidity, but it needs the trees. If there's no forest, there will be no humidity and all these high precipitations in the Amazons. If we deforest critical areas, we will lose a lot of humidity and lose obviously a lot of forests, no? Because if there's less rainfall and the rainfall is not coming to the Andes, so we will have also a lot of forests disappearing in the Andean forest. Many say that there will be much less water also in all these countries, Andean countries like Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, because they all depend from the water coming in from the Amazon. But also all this humidity is also important to regulate circulation of water planet-wide. No? So I think, yes, deforestation, if we analyze, I think it can be absolutely critical if we lose the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest is I think the biggest climate regulator of the world. Obviously, besides of the oceans, no, which are also very important, no, in climate regulation, no. But climate change, it's not only deforestation but also climate change, no, because there are a lot of areas in the Amazon, mostly in the southern part of Brazil, where precipitation has been lower, and the dry seasons has also been longer. So there is a lot of forest dying out because of climate change, not only because of deforestation. Deforestation combined also with climate change, and so we are losing a lot of forest area, or losing a lot of, maybe there may be still trees, but because a lot of species are not so tolerant to less precipitation or to higher temperatures, because there are also a lot of other species are disappearing, like pollinators. A lot of species depend. No, a tree depends on monkeys to disperse the seeds. If the tree disappears, so the monkey disappears, and so if we are losing species that are important within the forests, we are also losing biodiversity, and so it's something like a domino effect. So that it sums and sums, and so I think, and the extinction processes are advancing very, very fast. I think faster as we think, no, but we are not really monitoring that, no, because we're monitoring mostly the loss of forest. Oh, there's a lot of deforestation, but obviously we're losing biodiversity because of all of these other causes I was explaining, no, changes in the rainfall pattern, in the precipitation patterns, in the water flows of rivers. Now, if there's less precipitation, the rivers may be drier during or a longer dry season, no, and the water flows. Well, and so there are a lot of other species that depend on this water flow to have their habitats where to reproduce. Well, I think it's all interrelated, no? In a certain sense, we're coming back again if we don't understand how nature works and how we restore the main processes. As you mentioned, no, we have to learn how to regenerate a lot of processes. No, I don't know if it's too late, because I think we still are deforesting a lot. We are still using a lot. No, you see, no, carbon emissions haven't been reduced significantly. No, so the pattern continues, the economy continues, no, the pressure, I don't know. And all these agreements like the COP, no, on biodiversity laws, or the climate change conference, no, all these joint effort of all the countries, I think they haven't had the impact they should have now. And most of the countries really don't comply with all the commitments they acquired during all these conferences. Now, well, I think I don't know if we need a higher cows to really react or not, because we are not very precautious or preventive now although we know how to restore a lot of things now, but I think the dominant thinking in economy sometimes and mostly capitalism is still, there is a change, but I think it's not sufficient. Huh?
Yeah, I love that. In a lot of podcasts is when I talk about sustainability or the environment, I talk about if you can bridge the economic and the environmental together, you can really make a difference. And because it does seem like economy is king in a lot of ways, capitalism is king in a lot of ways. People are going to follow the dollar sign, but in some ways it can be short-sighted when looking at a place like Colombia. Looking at a place that hosts 10%. Let me see what the stat was: 10% of the planet's biodiversity. And the way you just described it, these small little changes in climate don't only affect one piece of the ecosystem; it affects everything, just like a domino effect. And I think from someone in my seat, sitting in the U.S., I've never personally been to South America before. I've never seen these things. So, I read things and I'm like, oh, it's just deforestation. But the reality is it's not. There's so many other things, just like you're mentioning there. But I will say, you brought up COP, and I think it's a great segue because COP 16, the Convention on Biological Diversity, is actually coming to Colombia. And you just mentioned, some of these big groups, these big conferences, they could be doing more. So I'd ask you the question, what is the significance of COP 16 coming to Colombia? And I mean, from your seat, what do you hope is accomplished in this conference?
Well, I think, yes, that's a big challenge. No, and I think one of the ideas of the COP16 on biodiversity is also to achieve that we can link more clearly climate change with biodiversity, no? Because there have been independent conferences now. So we have the conference on climate change and the conference on biodiversity. But as I explained you very simply, no, that obviously I think we are losing more biodiversity because of climate change. And so if we don't link both of these conferences or the discussion of the interlinks between the two, no, how biodiversity is really suffering, no, if we can say it in that sense, because of climate change. No, we are losing a lot of species, mostly of that. So, and it's also linked obviously to economy and, well, so I really think what we have to achieve is that we have to see that obviously humans is also a very dominant species, and it's a species which needs a lot of food, and the demands are growing and growing and growing. But also what is in a certain sense very tragic is that most areas we are growing now, maybe they will suffer also because of climate change. Now we see, but for example, Colombia says we have a lot of all these grasslands of the Orinoco. No, they say, well, this is an area we can develop for agro industry. But we made in TNC, for example, analysis on how climate change may affect these incredible grasslands we have now with an incredible biodiversity. But grasslands are always not very well recognized now. And so one of the ideas of TNC in the COP is also to say, well, we have to show the importance of grasslands, no? Because always people only think forests are important, no? But grasslands are also incredible, no? There are more, for example, we have, I think, in the Orinoco Basin, in the grasslands, maybe more than 800, 900 species of grasses only, no? And grasses may be important for cattle ranching. No, there are a lot of also diversity, which is unique, no? But when we think of grasslands, the people think, oh, it's something like a wasteland. No, so it's not very important because it's not the forest, no, because they drilled us in schools that only forests are important, no, and not so much grasslands. But coming back, so what if you see all these grasslands and they want to introduce agriculture within there, and most the typical agro industry, which is changing grasslands and everything, bringing all the pesticides in, and so the green revolution coming again. What happened also in Brazil, in the Amazon, in the Cerrado, in the south of South America. Now, so we have been changing all these unique ecosystems to produce more food. But all these areas, we analyzed, for example, here in the Colombian grasslands, that climate change may impact very, very heavily. So that there may be 50% less of rainfall maybe in 20 or 30 years. So if we develop all these areas, we cut down a lot of, well, forests are in a certain sense, well, they're also impacted, but all these agriculture demands more water. So, and if we lose forest and species diversity, because diversity, we always see diversity something that is also a part, but we are depending, agriculture is depending on biodiversity. Pest control is made by bats, by birds, by different insects, by amphibians, so they control a lot of pests. And if climate change gets more intense, I think a lot of pests may increase, because all these species that live within monocultures, like in big rice fields or in big soya fields, if biodiversity is not regulated, but biodiversity is a regulator of species, and also of illnesses. Now we have a lot of illnesses like the COVID, and all these pests can increase with climate change, and so I think what we have to, and I think what is Colombia, the Ministry of Environment said we have to recreate peace, not only among humans but also peace with nature. We have reconstructed relation with nature, and I think yes, in a certain way, I think that's the main message we have to recreate now. That in a certain sense, indigenous people see nature as something like sacred, so that, and they have a dialogue with nature, so we extract something from nature, but we give back, so it's a certain equilibrium in that sense, and we lost that, and because of agriculture and all what we told before, that of economics. So I think the idea is that the COP can really help us to see which are the best pathways on how to reconstruct this relation with nature, and that as you told us, now we have to work with more regenerative processes, because what we try to do with regenerative agriculture or something is that agriculture is based on the processes of nature, so that maybe we can have, and we have a lot of examples where organic, it's not organic agriculture, because organic is that you use maybe organic products not to control pests or something like that. The idea in regenerative processes is that nature controls it, you recreate that balance. And so birds will be controlling pests, or bats will be controlling pests. We are reconstructing all these relationships, and so that agriculture, and there's an equilibrium. It's a different focus, in regenerative processes. As you say, also in architecture and everything. It's how we all the processes we have in our economies are more sustainable, but based on nature-based solutions, on nature-based processes. Mm-hmm.
Well, awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward. I think that's in October. I think running from October to November of this year. I'll be curious about what comes out of it. But,
yes.
But we'll see. We'll see. I think I don't know whether
we have to be positive at it. At least yes.
Yes. But I think that's a good point to kind of move this conversation, and looking specifically at birds in Colombia. I think when I thought about the rainforest, in the past, I would think about plants and trees and maybe spiders and all the bugs and maybe something like jaguars, any of these cats, all of this stuff I would think about. But I feel like I would fail to think about birds and how important birds are to biodiversity. And I think I learned this. I was actually doing some research on this episode. I listened to a talk that you did. Let me see. It was called The Safe Place to Land Recording. This was like 3 years ago. The Nature Conservancy did. And I learned about migration of birds and the different migration periods and all of that. It was very interesting. But I just want to understand birds. And you're an expert in this field. You're an avid bird watcher, is what I read. And Colombia actually has the highest number of bird species in the world, with over 2,000 species. So no better place to have this conversation right now. So yeah, I would just ask you to talk a little bit about birds in Colombia and the importance.
Yes, I think, as you said, no, Colombia is the most biodiverse country in birds of the world. No, that's something like 11,000 species of birds. And so we have something like 1/5 of all the species live in Colombia. No, so in a certain sense, you say, well, it's due. It's explained again because what we talked at the beginning of this podcast, not because the uniqueness and the diversity of climates and all these evolutionary diversification which occurred in Colombia because of the geology and all these events that happened. No, so we have we have unique species in the Orinoco, in the Amazon, in the Andean ranges. In the central one is different from the eastern one and from the western one. So and in the Pacific, and we have isolated mountain ranges in the north of Colombia. Well, so all these different ecosystems. No, I think maybe Colombia is also one of the richest countries if we can analyze it per ecosystem types. No, so we have, well, what I said, no, very dry ecosystems, the most humid ecosystems in the world, and obviously there are birds adapted to all these different types of habitats. No, and so yes, the biodiversity is really unique. And if we are going, well, I think this uniqueness but there's also a lot of threatened species, no, of these. I think there may be in a certain level of threat, mostly because of habitat loss. I think, yes, that's again, no, mostly deforestation is happening then, and not only deforestation, but I would say we are losing a lot of different types of ecosystems. No, grasslands are also being transformed. So all these diverse ecosystems I mentioned, obviously they have different birds, and if we are losing different ecosystems, we are losing that. No, and birds are incredible. I think birds and bats. No, we also Colombia. I think it's the second most diverse in bats. No, and they're also very diverse. No, because we have pollinators. There are also bats who pollinate. There are fruit birds that eat fruits, but also bats which eat fruits. No, so but insectivorous. No, mostly. I think most birds eat insects. No, so they're very, very important in controlling insects. No, and the fruit eaters are very important for dispersing seeds and maintaining the forests. Again, no, I think birds and bats. I think one work mostly at daytime and the other one mostly nocturnal. No, but both of these groups are incredibly important. But going back to birds, I think migration is very interesting, no? Because I think there is something like 225, or I don't know exactly the number, of migrating birds that come from the north, no, from the boreal area, no, from North America and Canada to South America. But there are also some birds migrating from the south, also to from Argentina and Chile or south from Brazil. They also migrate also to the north, not during the winter in the south. So all these migrating birds, which is a lot, no, I think mostly warblers. No, I think warblers is the most diverse group of species from the US and Canada, which come to Colombia. I think that's more than 40 species, 45 species of warblers, no, cerulean warblers, and all these warblers that live in the U.S. So they can migrate, or for example, also there's one good example, the bowling. No, it's more a grassland species. No, depending on seeds, a seed eater. I think he migrates from the northern part of the U.S. and crosses the Atlantic and comes to Colombia. So Colombia is in Central America. Obviously, there are a lot of migrating birds that remain mostly in Central America and remain there, and then maybe that's a stopover part. But it also there are a lot of birds coming to Colombia, and they land on the Caribbean coast. And the Caribbean coast is also heavily being impacted because of deforestation. No? It was an area covered mostly by dry tropical forest, and most of these forests has been also being disappearing. No? So obviously, if a migrating bird comes to Colombia and sees there's no habitat, not to survive because it's got lost, and they have to replenish their energy, and to recover their energy, eating what they eat, need to eat. So it's very important. It's not only important for the species remaining, because there are a lot of species remaining. Most of these warblers, they remain in forest patches, mostly in the Andean area. I think most of these species remain in the forest areas of the Andes, and we lost also, or have been losing a lot of all these Andean forests. Now, for example, in the Magdalena Valley, maybe 70% of the forests have been lost. So, interesting that most of these forests were replaced by shade coffee during a long of time, and many of these species adapted also to coffee growing regions. No? So coffee and shade coffee is one of the most important habitats for all these migratory birds. No, but also because again of economics, they said, no, we have to cut down all these shade coffee because it's not as productive as other different varieties of coffee, which can produce much more. So they changed in Colombia a lot of all these unique ecosystems, which were shade coffee, where there was a high biodiversity of trees, and they planted also a lot of fruits like oranges and avocados. And well, it's a very diverse ecosystem also. And so obviously other migrating species can also live in these transformed forests, no? And because if you are a fruit eater, or if you are an insectivore, you can also live in that types of forest, no? And so, well, that happened. So, but again, now they recognize that it's not only how much coffee you produce, because if you produce more coffee, you have to use more fertilizers, you have to use more agrochemicals. So at the end, the other one was an agro-ecosystem that they had to use nothing. No? It was absolutely, they didn't have to control any pests because it was a very diverse ecosystem. It's again, diversity, maintain the productive system. And so the rentability, maybe they produce less coffee, but the rentability was maybe even higher because they don't have to invest anything in fertilizers. No, they used also legume trees to fix nitrogen. So it was an incredible, yes, what we say, a very regenerative ecosystem, in the sense that it was based on all the ecological process we have to maintain, no? And to maintain bird diversity. So we have obviously a lot of birds coming in, but obviously it's also very diverse in local species, no? Because yes, in the Andes we have, I think, also the highest biodiversity of species, bird species also, no? So yes, I think there is a certain risk, no? And I think of the 2,000 species, maybe 300 are under a certain risk of getting extinct, no? Critically extinct. I think we have only 2 or 3 or 4 species. But yes, if due to climate change, I think extinction rates in birds will also rise, no? And I think both in the US or obviously in Latin America and mostly in tropical areas, not because, yes, if we're losing tree species, which a lot of bird species depend on all these fruits, on insects and everything. As we explained, everything is interrelated. And if it collapses or if we lose all these connections and these interrelations, so and interdependencies between plants and animals and birds and everything, I think, yes, we will be losing this unique biodiversity also in birds, no?
I mean, back to your point that you just mentioned there of, there's around, I guess, 2,000 bird species in Colombia, and, around 300 of those species are threatened, or are threatened to become extinct. I was reading through the Nature Conservancy's Latin America Impact Report. I think it was for 2022. I think is what the year was. And there was a section on it that was called A Song for Sustainability. And I thought this was a really cool section because it talks about, yes, there's these species that are being threatened, but the Nature Conservancy did this research to look at regenerative ranching on deforestation and soil degradation. Really cool study. I would just ask you, since you're the expert here, if you could talk about that study, the work that's being done through the Nature Conservancy to again protect these birds and kind of reverse this threatened area for the birds.
Yes, I think this sustainable cattle ranching project was a project that was started something in 2012, and it was TNC, the World Bank, the National Fedegan, the National Cattle Ranching Federation, and CIPAF, which is one of the organizations which has been developed these silvopastoral systems, no? So these silvopastoral systems, I think we are losing, coming back to deforestation, I think most of the forests are lost in Colombia is for cattle ranching, no? So we are cutting down forests to put in cattle, which is also in a certain sense absurd because obviously a forest is, if we really analyze the importance of the forest, it's much more valuable than a cattle, no, a cow on a hectare, no. Maybe most of the areas have a very, very low carrying capacity of cows. So it's in Colombia, it's something like less than 1 cow per hectare, no? So because in the Andean region, we have relative good soils, but also poor soils, and many of all these soils have been, in a certain sense, degraded because of overgrazing and everything. Erosion is happening, and so what is incredible about these silvopastoral systems is it's trying to recover forests or a forest canopy in these grasslands. No? So to have much more food, because if you have only grass, you have certain biomass that you can eat, that the cow can eat. But if you have shrubs, so we plant different shrub species that they fix also nitrogen. They are very good as fodder for the cattle. No? So it's also very rich in protein. No? All these plants that are planted there. And so we have different stories in the forest. No? So we have the canopy, we have lower trees. And so it's something like simulate something like a forest. Obviously, it cannot be too dense because obviously we need the grass also, no? Because so there has to be light coming into the soil. But the diversity of species, we in the study, during the 10 years that the project, it was something like 8 years, so that there were different silvopastoral systems developed now for the Andean region, for the Orinoco Basin, for the Caribbean coast. So different types of ecosystems, they have different silvopastoral systems, but the idea is the same, how we can increase plant diversity and plant biomass in ecosystems so that the cows have more food to eat. So you can go from half a cow per hectare to 2 or 3 cows per hectare. So the objective of the project was not only to help recover biodiversity, because obviously in these systems we registered more than 500 species of birds. So if maybe you're in an open grassland, there may be 10 species or 20, and and because we worked in different areas of Colombia and with different silvopastoral systems, so a lot of different species get back or use these silvopastoral systems, or because there are obviously a lot of food offer also for birds and other species like bats and other species. No, so and our for TNC, this project was because obviously we are not cattle ranchers. No, in TNC we are a conservation organization. So the idea is how these silvopastoral systems can help to reconnect isolated forest patches. Because of deforestation, we have forest patches left, but within a small forest patch, species go also extinct because they don't have enough food sources, or the genetic diversity can also be can be got lost. Sometimes my English is not the best, and so in these small patches, species die out, and or a lot of species may be got extinct. But if you reconnect all these forest patches through these silvopastoral systems, so that was the idea, no? How we can reconnect. And so the species use these silvopastoral systems to go from one forest patch to another forest patch, or use the silvopastoral systems also for their living, no? And so I think this project had an incredible impact, because I think maybe, I don't know, half of Colombia is grasslands, and most of the countries in cattle ranching in the Andean part. Obviously, the impact has been very high. So, reconverting all these degraded areas to silvopastoral systems, it's solving. We are capturing carbon, we are restoring biodiversity, and we are increasing also livelihoods of people. No, because if you go have only, and most people in the Andean region of Colombia, maybe they have 1 hectare, 2 hectares, or 5 hectares. No, it's a very small landowners. And if you have 3 cows or 4 cows, and you can go to 15 cows, you have more milk. And so obviously it was a incredible project for poverty alleviation in Colombia. No, and so through this project, it also had to create a lot of policies around how we can really bring to scale silvopastoral systems. No, so there are finance possibilities. No, if you want to reconvert your small cattle ranch or a cattle ranch to silvopastoral systems, there are a lot of aids, and there's also a lot of extensionists that help you not to see how you can do it. No, so it created a lot of solutions. No, how, no, because it was incredible. For example, to restore all these degraded lands and cattle ranching, there were not enough trees in Colombia, not to where to buy trees. No, I don't know how you say that in English. Los viveros, no, where you grow the seedlings, no, and you bring the seedlings to the area, no. So yes, like small farm greenhouses. Yes, greenhouses, no. So there were not enough trees, no, and so we needed millions of trees, and they weren't available, and so it had to create a new network, no, of supply chains and everything, no, so to really reconvert a lot of all these degraded grasslands or cattle ranching areas into more productive areas, no, and that has had an incredible impact on biodiversity. And I think if we continue with these processes, I think we can help a lot of all these endangered species, no, or threatened species, to recover in certain areas, because of mostly recovering this connectivity and among all these different types of ecosystems. No, I think connectivity is one of the most important solutions, not to lose biodiversity, because of deforestation.
Well, I think you just broke down something that we talked about probably midway through this episode. I think I'd mentioned that, a lot of podcasts, I talk to people and I'm like, if you can just bridge the economic and the environmental, then you can get a lot of people on board. It seems like through this study and through this work that the Nature Conservancy has done in Colombia, you've done just that. You're bridging economic and environmental. You're improving the lives of people. You're cutting down emissions. You're increasing biodiversity. And it's all through this, again, this term that we've used a lot of regeneration. So I think it's really cool, really cool work, and cool to see in a place like Colombia. But Tomas, I want to leave us on this episode by just asking you a question, and asking basically from the listener seat. If a listener was like, if I could learn one thing from this episode, if I could take one thing away from this episode, very simply, what would you say that would be, in the Colombia area?
I think that Colombia, being such a biodiverse country, I think we haven't never used this incredible biodiversity to helping develop the country, no? Because I think what happened in most of all these countries in the tropics is that we have imported a lot of solutions from the north, no? So we are introducing exotic grasses, we are introducing a lot of exotic species, etc., etc. But it's incredible, no? We bring in economic solutions that are not adapted to the country. Now we have also a big problem with invasive species. We never talked of that. No, that's also a problem. No, I think extinction, for example, in water ecosystems is mostly due because of invasive species. And it's because we think, no, we have to bring this fish from the tilapia fishes from Africa to Colombia because we know how to grow them. No, but we have the highest biodiversity in fishes in the world also, no, almost, no? With Amazon and all, but we don't. No, we don't use our local. And so the lesson is, first we have to recover this relationship with nature, learn from nature, know how nature works, how we can benefit from nature, how we can use, for example, forests. No, it's what I said. No, for example, now as Colombia is the most biodiverse country in birds of the world, bird watching is, as an economy, is growing very fast. So now maybe that if you have a hectare in forest, it's more valuable because bird watchers pay much more than if you have a cow. So I think, yes, we have to value our nature, no? Because obviously people need to live, no? And if you don't give them down solutions, if a peasant only know how to raise cattle and he have learned from his father and grandfather that he has to chop down the forest, and that's the only solution to survive, so he will continue doing it, no? So we, as the Nature Conservancy and other organizations, we have to show how we can really find solutions on how to manage better grasslands. Not that's what we're doing in the Orinoco Basin, how to manage better native grasslands, how to restore forests, how we can use diversity, how to educate people, re-educate, which is very difficult, no? Because if you have been educated in a certain sense and that you only see, well, the forest, you have to cut it down, no? And if you see compare a campesino, no, a peasant in the Amazon, they say that indigenous people are lazy people because they don't cut down the forest, because they really live from the forest, no, and they use the forest, and they have maybe a much better life than the peasant who has very few cattle on the land, no? So it's also changing the mentality, the mindsets, re-education, yes, but I think it's difficult, no, because as we said, no, to change economy is difficult, to change the mindset of the people. No, if you have been trained in traditional agriculture, that's your model. And if you say to people, no, but you're degrading land, you are creating erosion, you are contaminating the rivers, and the negative impact of your activity is terrible. Maybe you produce a lot of money and dollars, etc., but the impact to the planet is terrible. No, so we have to, I think, yes, the priority is to reconstruct this relationship with nature, no? Otherwise, I think we won't survive, no? As a species, no? Or maybe some survive, no? And maybe they can reconstruct a better relationship to nature.